Welcome to Presentation, Ponder, Practice. This week we're in Hebrews chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. Aaron, the first high priest, is compared to Christ, the high priest. The writer details the function and qualifications of a high priest, leading to a central point. From that point, he works in reverse order to show what his central point means for the function and qualifications mentioned. Before we get into the text, we need to be reminded that Jesus is high priest. He has previously been called a faithful high priest, Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17. He will be referred to as another or different priest in Hebrews chapter 7, verses 11 and 15. In chapter 10 and verse 21, Jesus is called a great priest. Now for Hebrews chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. All high priests are appointed from among men for the purpose of serving men. They act in things pertaining to God, meaning they lead in public worship, which is linked here to the offering of gifts or offerings and sacrifices. The priest represented the people before God. They gave to God what the people brought to give as an offering to Him. A high priest must be gentle or demonstrate compassion with those whom he serves, because he is surrounded with weaknesses in his own life. In other words, a priest is a human with weaknesses which he faces that are just like that of the people he serves. The weakness of the will and action both being in accord with God. Sin can come about because a person is led astray or deceived into sinning because they don't know any better. Because of this weakness which leads men to sin, a priest is obligated to offer, to bring toward God sacrifices for sin or for the guilt that remains after the initial act or initial event. The priest offers sacrifices both for the people he serves and for himself. Leviticus chapter 16, verses 11 through 19. A high priest is a chosen and appointed person by God. No one can make himself high priest by claiming the honor or simply saying he is one. God must call or summon one to take the position of high priest. Thus, even as in verse 4 is emphatic. It's emphatic, showing that Aaron is a clear example of what it is to be called by God in order to accept the position of high priest. Aaron himself received the call from God, and upon his acceptance of God's call, he received the honor of being priest. God appointed every high priest to serve Him on behalf of the people. Christians need the great high priest who is in close communion with God. It is through Christ that we have access to God. Every priest is human like we are. They make mistakes and sin. They experience the infirmities of the flesh. They can therefore deal gently and compassionately with the people and sympathize with them. Jesus sympathizes with our weaknesses, Hebrews 4 verse 15 and chapter 7 verse 28. He also deals with the ignorant and misguided with great compassion, Hebrews chapter 2 verse 18 and chapter 4 verse 15. Priests offer sacrifices for the people and for themselves. But the superiority of Jesus as high priest is seen and evidenced in that he had no sin of his own for which to offer a sacrifice for himself. But he took on our sins and offered himself as the sacrifice for us. Every Christian has therefore been appointed as priest by God, as part of a holy priesthood, 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5, and a royal priesthood, 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. Also mentioned more than a few times in John's writing of the Revelation. Though in the flesh with our weaknesses, Christians are still priests of God, appointed by God. We are allowed to give offerings of ourselves and from our means, and sacrifices, specifically sacrifices of our lives, as we become living sacrifices to God on behalf of ourselves. Thus, God has given those who are obedient to Him the privilege and honor of being priests. We must live holy lives that demonstrate our position as priests before God, which we are bringing ourselves before God in obedience. And therefore, we are to encourage others to come before God as well. We must show to God or give to Him our gifts and sacrifices of a pure life. Up next, the writer of Hebrews will contrast the priest like Aaron and ourselves with a priest of Christ, the perfect high priest. Until next time, may God bless you.